Alrighty, let's get started, chat. How's everybody doing today? Welcome to, oh, my thing's all, hold on, there we go. Hope y'all are doing well. Welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alo Kanoja. Just a reminder that although I'm a psychiatrist, nothing we discuss on stream today is intended to be taken as medical advice. Everything we're talking about today is intended to be taken as education or entertainment. If y'all have an actual medical question, please go see a licensed professional and get some personalized advice. So yeah, so we're, nothing that we're discussing today is medical advice. Couple of things, let's see, announcements wise. I think April is still our month of meditation. So I think there are meditations going on the Discord every week. So be sure to check those out. A couple of other things. We're doing a couple of career-oriented events on Discord. So on Thursday at 12 p.m. Central Time, we've got a Q&A with our Director of Growth here at HG. So he's going to be talking, or he'll be answering questions about how to build a career as a creative professional. I think, there's a lot of understanding nowadays that you don't have to be a STEM major or be in a STEM field to be professionally successful. And so actually, I think that nowadays is one of the best times to be in a creative field. So some of the changes to barriers to publication, the ability to self-publish, the ability to just jump on Twitch and start making content, or sign up on YouTube and start making content. We have so many different content creation platforms that if you're, in the creative field, I think you have an opportunity that people before, the advent of the internet and some of these platforms have never had before. So if y'all have questions, Ryan will be on Discord this Thursday at 12 noon. Also at 12 on Thursday at 5:30 Central Time, we're doing a workshop on career progression in the tech industry. So if y'all are in the tech industry and want to better understand, how do I progress? How do I grow? Feel free to show up and participate in our workshop. Right? Okay. So we've got a couple of really good subreddit posts today. So we're going to be talking a little bit about understanding addiction some. And then there's some good posts about, why we never feel like we're ready. And then we also have a post, and I almost think that some of these things are like almost sequential today. So then we also have a post about someone who's been meditating regularly and is sort of like developing into a stoic and is kind of like struggling to understand a little bit about, why they should participate in life if you're like internally content, right? So there's a really common challenge, which I tend to run into when I start teaching people how to meditate, which is that we start, our primary motivation comes from ambition, right? So like we want stuff and we want to like get more. And so then like, as we start to meditate and our ambition or our desire starts to wane, then we can get kind of confused about why should we do stuff? If I'm no longer like materialistically motivated, like where does my motivation come from? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Right. So it's kind of interesting because that's actually closer to what meditation was designed for. And so we'll hopefully go through some of that stuff. And then we also have some stuff about, not feeling like you're productive enough. So let's kind of dive in. Where's that from? Put these foolish ambitions to rest. Is that from Elden Ring? Or Symphony of the Night or what? Yeah, okay. Yeah. Man, Elden Ring is something else, let me tell you what. Yeah, I've heard that line many, 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 many times. Yeah, so let's go ahead and dive in. Okay. So I've managed to abstain from porn and masturbation, but my productivity has lowered significantly. And I am impulsive buying. My impulsive buying came back in full force. Last time I posted, I was doing so well. I exercised steadily, not half-assed. Even though I hate exercise, I still managed to do it. Good job. I did my chores, did my studies, managed to control my impulsive buying to a medium yet manageable level. However, my porn and masturbation addiction was the one I was stumped. Before I did another attempt, I watched the Huberman podcast with Anne Lumbeck. The man likes to inform the general public about neuroscience and ways to use it to our advantage. He's quite similar to Dr. K, but highly specialized on neuroscience. Bro got a degree, and more on the science stuff. Thankfully, I'm a first-year nursing student, so I can keep up with the anatomical parts and such. Not going to lie, some of it are way too advanced for me. I finished the podcast and gained some insight and learned some tips, now to put them to practice. I felt huge fluctuations in my mood. It made me wonder if this is how women felt during menstruation on the first day. Interesting side benefit of empathy, maybe. Food cravings made me spend more than I should. Exercise has been great difficulty to initiate and finish. I started living like a slob again. Luckily, I managed to finish most of my assignments before starting detox, so my school load is very light and the deadline is still very far. The fact that I felt definitive withdrawals within 2 or 3 days pretty much confirms that I really had a legitimate addiction, and those years of porn use and masturbation has really altered my brain's dopamine homeostasis. So the help and advice that I need now, how do I recover from such a difficult process of detoxification whilst juggling my exercise, chores, schoolwork, managing finance, and keeping my head in the game? It is legitimately difficult, and I started to understand how some people have great difficulty recovering from addiction. Once again, empathy +1. I know the road to recovery is constant and lifelong, and I want to gain some insights and tips to keep myself from becoming worse. So, this is the kind of thing where I think this is a really good representation of what the road to recovery looks like. And there are a lot of important principles here that I'm going to sort of share with you, having worked with people who have addictions and stuff, about kind of how the mind works, what the role of an addiction is, and what it feels like to try to get off of it, or what are the challenges that it takes to get off of something. So let's start by sort of defining addiction, okay? So how do you know if you have an addiction, or what is an addiction? So as human beings, we have a mind, and the mind juggles lots of different things. The mind experiences positive things, it experiences negative things, and generally speaking, when we try to get motivated to do something, the more negative stuff our mind is dealing with, the harder it is to do, right? So let's say that I'm trying to study for an algebra exam, and, my girlfriend just broke up with me the day before. So as a result of those negative emotions, my mind is going to be creating all these thoughts. There's going to be some concerns, maybe anxiety, maybe fear for the future, maybe guilt. All kinds of different stuff is going to be going on in my mind, and I'm unable to study. So in order to focus our mind, what we tend to do is use something called a coping mechanism. So a coping mechanism is a way that we take some kind of distraction, negative emotion, negative thought, something that gets in the way of us doing what we want to do, and we use some kind of tool to make that thing calm down. So in the worst case scenarios, people will use things like substances, right? So like marijuana or alcohol or whatever. Sometimes we'll use things like video games. Sometimes we'll use things like pornography. So we've sort of figured out, as the human race, what are the things that are effective at quieting our mind when our mind is unquiet. And once our mind starts to quiet down, we can start to be more productive. So we've sort of figured out, almost in like an individual evolutionary sense, what works for us. And that's oftentimes a pattern you'll see with addicts, which is that they'll have something called a drug of choice. Why do some people have one drug of choice and other people have another drug of choice? oftentimes when you're dealing with people who have substance use problems, they've tried a lot of stuff, right? But there's a particular thing that's their drug of choice. And that even has been shown to track back to, what kind of neuroscience effect a particular substance has. So, some is one of my mentors once put it, doesn't actually work like this, but a particular drug in one person due to genetic variation and all these kinds of other things will light their brain up like a Christmas tree. And for another person, the drug will be different. That's why we have a drug of choice. So kind of going back, we each sort of figure out, okay, when I have negative emotions and I need to focus, here's what I'm going to use to make myself feel better. And the array of coping mechanisms is like vast, right? So we have everything from video games and substances to pornography to also things like meditation and exercise and, eating comfort food, right? So what is an addiction? So I tend to think about addictions as things that are adaptive and then become maladaptive. So over time, your coping mechanism, which used to help, may still work for that one thing, but the cost of employing that coping mechanism becomes greater than the benefit. So like eating comfort food is great. Like that can be like good, it's nourishing, it feels good, whatever. Or maybe it's not nourishing depending on your comfort food. But then when we start to like cross the realm of like comfort food into like binge eating or, like food addiction or things like that, that's when it's kind of gone too far. This is where it's starting to affect our health. Sure, it still provides us with some kind of emotional benefit, but like it's causing problems in other parts of life. So if we look at someone who's got an addiction, usually there are like two things going on. So we're going to talk about different kinds of addiction for a second. So for a long time, there's been a debate whether marijuana is addictive. And part of that debate has to do with the principle of physiologic tolerance and withdrawal. So when I am addicted to something like alcohol or opiates, the physiologic effects on my body are profound. So alcohol works on something called the GABA receptor. Opioids tend to work on different kinds of opioid receptors, but the mu receptor is really, really important. And so we know from studies of neurobiology that when you regularly use a substance, our receptors will adapt to sort of develop a tolerance. So caffeine's another good example where we'll develop a physiologic tolerance. So when we start to use caffeine, it can keep us up all night, but if we use it on a regular basis, then it doesn't keep us up all night. In fact, without it, we start to suffer, right? So we experience some kind of physiologic withdrawal. So there are some substances like marijuana, for example, or even things like pornography or video games that don't appear to develop the same kind of physiologic tolerance and withdrawal that things like alcohol and opiates develop. So how do we sort of know this, or what's the argument for this? So first is that, for example, our GABA receptors get regulated so heavily that if you're addicted to alcohol and you stop cold turkey, the withdrawal that you go through can conceivably be fatal. Or not conceivably, it really can be fatal and is fatal for an unfortunate percentage of people. So what happens is literally when you go through alcohol withdrawal, depending on what kind of tolerance you have, how much you've been drinking, and genetics and other individual factors. So alcohol kind of slows down neuronal activity. So in the absence of alcohol, if you've kind of like, really, really like accounted for the depressing effect of alcohol, maybe this is the kind of thing where I should draw this out. So let's do this. So we'll explain physiologic tolerance real quick, okay? So let's take a look. Hold on. There we go. Okay. So I'm just going to explain this real quick. Okay? Then we're going to go back to the main part. So let's talk about physiologic withdrawal. So let's say I use something called alcohol. Okay? So here's the signal. Okay? And then here's my response. Now, if I use alcohol, which is a depressant, so the GABA receptor is a hyperpolarizing receptor. So it's usually chloride ion channel is the simplest way to think about it. Makes it harder for your neurons to turn on, basically. So when I add alcohol, what happens is that alcohol essentially... Oh. Sorry, hold on. GG. Okay. So what alcohol essentially does is it lowers the effect of the signal. Okay, so alcohol artificially puts us here. So then our brain is like, oh, we're supposed to be in the middle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to adapt. I'm going to change the nature of my neurons. I'm going to make them more sensitive because alcohol has a depressing effect. So my physiologic adaptation is going to be in this direction. We can also look at something like caffeine, where this is my normal function. Here's my response. And so what does caffeine do? Caffeine amps it up, right? So this is caffeine. And so then over time, our brain is like, hold on a second. This is like, we're too amped up. Let's go ahead and adapt and let's lower our responsiveness. So then what happens is once you add the blue and green arrows together, what you end up with is you end up in the middle, which is why if you look at issues of withdrawal, like without caffeine, the reason that it sucks is like you operate down here, right? So you're like, you feel sluggish, you feel slow. And so what happens in physiologic alcohol withdrawal is you actually operate up here. And what does this mean practically? What does it mean to like operate up here? So what it means to operate up here is you can actually have seizures. So your neurons are so excitable, they depolarize so quickly that you can get unregulated electrical like activity in the brain, and you can actually have a seizure. And then remember, neurons and neuronal functions and depolarizing cells are not just in your brain. So you can also get problematic electrical activity within the heart, and you can get a cardiac arrhythmia that results in death. So this is why, like, when people say like marijuana is not addictive, what they're referring to is that this physiologic process does not seem to exist with marijuana, or it happens at a much, much smaller level, okay? So this is what we mean by marijuana is not addictive. But these things like video games, like pornography doesn't do this to your, doesn't act like this. So in the case of opiates, for example, we'll get opioid receptors all over the body. So what you'll see is you'll get things like, so opioids are constipating. They will provide pain relief. Those are two of the biggest things. They'll also kind of slow your mind down. So when people are going through opioid withdrawal, they experience the opposite of those things. They'll have diarrhea. Sometimes they'll feel nauseous or even vomit. They'll get sweaty. They'll start to feel like very agitated and restless. Their pain can actually their pain receptors can become more sensitized. So opioid withdrawal is like a very, very unpleasant experience, which according to some people that I've worked with is like worse than death. Hands down, the worst experience of their life is like the week or two that they go through opioid withdrawal. So this is what we sort of mean by like, some substances are not addictive. You don't develop a physiologic tolerance. But we clearly develop dependencies on these other things like pornography addiction, video game addiction, things like that. So then the question is, okay, like what is that kind of dependency? And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where we use coping mechanisms to help deal with negative emotions, right? So oftentimes what you end up seeing is if I'm using pornography to deal with negative emotions so that I can function and focus and be productive and exercise and stuff like that, right? Because I have all these kinds of like negative stuff going on. I'm unmotivated. I'm ashamed of myself, whatever. And so if I use pornography, it kind of like deadens my mind a little bit, gets some dopamine spurts, changes my thinking, and then like it kind of equilibrates me. So what we tend to see is that those underlying psychological things that you need the coping mechanism to cover, okay, those don't go away when you stop using an addictive substance. So forget about the physiology for a second. We're talking about kind of the emotional coping or the emotional dependence, for lack of a better term. Maybe more than emotional. Identity-related, thought-related, etc. Mental. Let's call it mental. So oftentimes what you see is that when you take an addiction away from someone or you don't let someone use an addiction, you see an upswing of those negative mental states, which in turn means that people will reach towards other behaviors. So oftentimes when you work in addictions, what you find is it feels like you're playing whack-a-mole, where the second that you control someone's opioid use, they'll start doing things like self-injurious behavior. So cutting or something like that. So self-injurious behavior is also actually a coping mechanism. It's really fascinating when I talk to people who engage in self-harm. They're not actually trying to kill themselves. There's something about, self-harm can be incredibly focusing for the mind. And so remember that like our brains will figure out like what works for us. And sometimes people who are, have such a negative emotional state that they need something like a sensation of physical pain to obliterate all of their thoughts. So the third kind of thing, the bucket here that tends to pop up as well, is sometimes people also develop like issues with eating disorders. So kind of the worst case scenarios are, if you're in this situation, you're not hopeless or anything, but as a clinician, what can be challenging to deal with until you understand this is someone who's got like 2 or 3 unhealthy coping mechanisms. And the moment you fix one, those negative emotions that were suppressed by the addiction come roaring back. And as those emotions come roaring back, we start to engage in other things. And that's what we see in this situation, right? So the person stopped watching pornography or dealt with their porn addiction, and their impulsive buying behaviors increased. So for any given person, it may be like, some combination of all of the above, right? So some people engage in self-injurious behavior. Some people engage in video games. Some people engage in pornography. Some people engage in impulsive buying. Some people engage in even like emotionally manipulative tactics to feel loved. So this is like a common thing that, people don't really think about, which is when I feel bad, in order to get a sense of emotional comfort, sometimes what I'll do is like lean on someone else to provide that for me. And sometimes that can be frustrating for the other person, or I don't know how to ask for it. I'm not really aware of it. So I'll engage in like emotionally like manipulative behavior to evoke a response from someone else. So the key point here is that those underlying emotions that you're using to cope, you can get rid of the coping mechanism. And when you get rid of the coping mechanism, you may recalibrate your neurons after a period of withdrawal, right? So this is what neuroscience will sort of tell us. So like, we talk about this when we talk about neuroscience. A lot of neuroscientists will sort of talk about this stuff, right? In terms of like your receptors and stuff like that. But clinicians will also appreciate like that there's kind of a personal, individual, psychological component to this. And that component is what causes the whack-a-mole sort of thing to pop up, right? Because now like you used to deal with this with pornography and now the porn isn't there anymore. So like, how are you going to deal with it? We're going to start buying more. Now, the other thing that we tend to see, which is also very common, is this person is saying, as I've quit pornography, it's harder for me to exercise, harder for me to study, harder for me to focus. I don't feel motivated. Why is that? Well, we sort of explain that, right? Because the reason that you use pornography is to get your mental state calmed down so that you can focus your mind. So as you remove that Band-Aid, as you remove that coping mechanism, expect all of this stuff to happen. So expect, first of all, that you may start leaning on other unhealthy coping mechanisms. You may start to experience more mental discomfort. The good news with both of these things is that this is like there's good strategies that you can use for this. So the first is this is why we teach healthy coping mechanisms, right? This is why mindfulness is so big, meditation is so big, because if we want to bring that mental stress down and we don't want to use pornography, if we just take away the pornography, that stress will come back. So that's where we can use something like meditation to lower that stress over time. That too has like a couple of different angles to it, right? One is like development of empathy, development of compassion. That's all like more mental stuff. And there's also physiologic or neuroscientific stuff, right? So we'll see that we'll disengage things like the default mode network. We'll lower our cortisol or CRH production, which is corticotropic releasing hormone. Will sort of affect things physiologically, and will sort of affect things kind of like more globally on a mental or psychological level. So that's why developing healthy coping mechanisms is really, really important and a big, important piece of sort of coming off of a dependence. Now, you don't have to develop a healthy coping mechanism. It just makes it a lot easier, okay? The second thing to understand is that at the end of the day, why are addictions so difficult to get rid of? And it's because of that internal emotional stuff, right? So like as someone who's done a lot of work in addictions, like the main thing that I found is that you can go to AA, you can start this medication, you can go to rehab. That'll all help, right? So those are all evidence-based interventions, or not evidence-based, but evidence-supported or scientifically validated interventions, that's the right term, that work. But the truth is it doesn't work for everyone, right? So what's the difference? What's the difference between someone who goes to rehab for 30 days, comes out sober, stays sober for a year, and someone who goes to rehab for 30 days and like relapses like within 3 days of coming out? And some of that is luck. Some of it is just the roll of the dice. But some of it is actually a big part of it is the internal work, right? So what is that emotional stuff that comes up? We talk about coping to kind of bring it down. But where are these feelings originating from? And you can do that core work, right? So is it feelings of shame? Is it feelings of I've fallen behind, I've screwed up my life, I'm so this person is better than me? Is it insecurity? Is it seeking love, right? So this is all kinds of things that happen in addiction. So a good example is sometimes you'll have people who have a history of trauma who really just want to be loved. And when it comes to addictions, it's like it's really easy to find someone who you can feel love for if both of y'all are addicted to the same substance, right? Like, because then y'all are together. You're in it through thick and thin. You're together, you're together, you're together. You feel so good, right? Like there are all kinds of other emotional needs that get met through addictions. So you have to do that internal emotional work, right? So this is where when you think a little bit about, let's say, impulsive buying or pornography or whatever, what are the actual feelings or mental state that you're trying to improve, right? What is the experience of you off of your drug of choice? So this is where it's going to be negative probably, right? But then is it anxiety? And then you need to ask yourself, sure, you can use a coping mechanism to kind of reduce it. And hopefully through meditation over time, you'll change that core part that it's coming from. But in cognitive behavioral therapy, there could be some kind of schema. In Sanskrit, we call it a samskar, right? So what is it that you're trying to fix? And then where does that thought come from? Where did you start feeling that way? How did you start to think that way? And so ultimately, if I'm working with someone, for example, who's I don't know, let me just think of an example of someone who's, let's say you're working with an incel. And so incels have all these belief systems, and those belief systems are there. And sometimes they're also using substances and stuff like that. And the reason is because or doomer, let's say. So when I stop using the substance, all my doomer thoughts come back, right? The world is going to end. This is going to happen. I'm never going to amount to anything. And then the question is when did you start to lose faith in the world, right? And how did you lose that faith? And as you go track back to the source of your thoughts, when did you start feeling this way? Where did these thoughts originate from? Don't worry about the evidence. This is where a lot of people get tripped up, right? So if you talk to someone who has a negative schema or negative samskar, they'll tell you about the evidence. Oh, because of this, and alphas and betas and sigmas, and they'll use all this pseudoscientific kind of BS, right? They'll give you lots of evidence to confirm their belief, but you can try to dispute that if you want to. You're never going to get anywhere. The question is, where did the original belief come from? Because our mind, once we believe something, our mind looks for confirmation. That's what the confirmation bias is. So if you're dealing with an addiction, couple of things to keep in mind. The first is that as you extract yourself from it, it's going to be a bumpy road. Physiologically, this is where you should actually see a medical professional. So if you actually have a substance use disorder, you should absolutely see a medical professional because some of these things can be life-threatening. Even in the non-substance use category, it can definitely help to see a medical professional because they'll know these kinds of things, right? They'll help you support you through that sort of stuff. But as you cut back on your pornography, be prepared for the other things to rise up and watch what happens, right? Why are you doing that? When do you impulsively buy? It's when you're emotionally not feeling good. Recognize that as that negative emotional stuff comes up, there's going to be an impact on your productivity. The good news is that impact is, generally speaking, temporary. So in the same way that your brain will reacclimatize, right? So our brain develops a tolerance, and if we cut the substance, that tolerance will go away over time. In the same way, you'll find a way to get motivated again. It'll just your brain will just kind of recalibrate. It takes longer, though, than some of these physiologic tolerances. Because the physiologic tolerances can get better within anywhere from 72 hours to a week. Sometimes there are more long-term effects of sobriety, a month out, 3 months out, 6 months out. You'll start to see cognitive benefits and things like that. People just feel better. So you may be in for that, motivational slump for like a couple weeks, month, maybe even 2, 3. And that's kind of okay, right? So your body has a natural tendency to heal. So just have faith in that. The other thing is that if you lean on other coping mechanisms, that equilibration will happen less. Does that make sense? Because now we're not needing to equilibrate because we're just using something else, right? So even in, for example, alcohol detox, we'll give people particular medications that work on the GABA receptor as a substitute for alcohol and slowly taper that down. And that's how you sort of safely detox someone from alcohol. So if you're using a substitute, that's going to slow the process of equilibration, but it may smooth it out a little bit. Next thing to remember is that at the end of the day, those negative thoughts, you can use an unhealthy coping mechanism or develop a healthy coping mechanism that'll smooth out your kind of return to normalcy. And then the last thing to consider is that at the end of the day, you may need to do that internal work, right? So the kinds of negative states that arise when you are not using, where do those negative mental states come from? Where did they originate from? What are your actual fears, concerns, etc.? And this is why, I know it sounds kind of weird, but this is why you'll see internal emotional work, cathartic kind of work happen in basically all fields of addiction recovery. So you can see a licensed therapist, right, who will talk you through that stuff, hopefully accelerate the process. But you also see those kinds of things in Alcoholics Anonymous, where people will go up and they'll say, "Hi, my name is Alok, I'm an alcoholic," and then they'll share, right? So there's some kind of processing, acknowledgement of negative feelings, emotional support, camaraderie. So there's some research even into the common factors between therapy and other things. So how does Alcoholics Anonymous work? How does therapy work? Is there some overlap? And it turns out that there is. So you have to do that core overlap kind of work, which is internal emotional processing. So if y'all are in this kind of situation, it's really, really common, right? So there's going to be some neuroscience stuff going on, but try to develop healthy coping mechanisms and understand what you're in for, right? So that's the key thing. That's the reason we're really digging into this is understand what you're signing up for and the phases of it and what you can do to sort of reduce it. Questions? Food addiction is the same, right? So food, it doesn't matter. So each of these things, depending on your substance or your choice of addiction, the support that you're going to get is going to be or the neuroscientific or psychological support you're going to get is going to be a little bit tailored to that thing. So for example, with food addiction, we get a lot of very physiologic signals of satisfaction. We also get things, so I've seen this in people who are addicted to food. So when you eat a bunch of food, you get an insulin spike. If you eat carbohydrates, that is. When you get an insulin spike, right, because you get this peak of blood sugar, your blood sugar shoots through the roof. You get a surge of insulin. As you get a surge of insulin, you move from a sympathetic, which is a sympathetic nervous system mode, to a parasympathetic nervous system mode. So remember, in the sympathetic nervous system mode, my anxiety is going to be worse. My mind is going to be active, right? I'm going to see danger is more real. All this stuff is in Dr. K's guide. And when I move to a parasympathetic mode, it's going to slow my mind down, right? You go into a food coma. And so what some people with food addiction will do is they'll activate a food coma to slow down their mind, quiet their thoughts, make it easy for you to sleep, right? So we'll see food addiction and insomnia kind of go hand in hand sometimes too. Because why do you have trouble falling asleep? Because my mind, right? Oh my God. I have all these thoughts. I have all these worries. And they're too much to handle. I can't fix them. Because when you're going to bed at night, you can't fix anything. So any anxiety or thought that you have is going to be hopeless. Right? The future, climate change. And so your mind gets ramped up. You get sympathetically activated. Danger feels more real. And so when you food coma yourself, all that stuff kind of chills out. We're content. Right? Slows things down. So in each of these addictions, there are going to be unique impacts on your body and mind, and ultimately overcoming each and every one of these involves understanding what you're up against. So then you can tailor things, right? So when I work with people who have a food addiction, one of the key things that I target is insomnia. And so if you can target that insomnia really well, then somehow it really seems to help them. Yeah, right. So someone saying, masturbation before sleep, it's another big reason, right? So what do? You're all these thoughts and worries, and then you masturbate, and then you get the surge of dopamine. You feel kind of content. You feel a little bit sleepy. So it's almost like a self-medication, right? So you need healthier coping mechanisms. You can maybe do something like yoga nidra. Sometimes I'll prescribe medication to people depending on the situation, right? Questions? So someone saying, this is so hard, I can't do it. So I can empathize with that. It is definitely very hard. The thing about a lot of this, like overcoming substance use, or especially like the non-substance use addictions, what you really have to do, the main thing that you have to do is nothing. So it's the avoidance behavior, right? And that sometimes is the hardest thing of all. Like, what you have to do is just tolerate it, because your body will recalibrate. It's just going to be really painful. Doing nothing sucks. Yes, it does. Sometimes doing nothing is the hardest thing of all. That's why it's so hard to meditate. Yeah, so sometimes there's comorbidity with depression and restless leg. Absolutely. This is kind of interesting. There's a paper by... Let me see if I can find this. So there's a video in Dr. K's guide about Ayurvedic variants of depression. And let me see if I can find the paper. I can't find it right now. There's a good paper by, let's see if we can find it this way. I know this is kind of a random question, but Fava, depression, anger attacks. Yeah, so there's, this is interesting if you guys want to know about restless leg. And so I think this is the original paper. So 1998, right? So it's a little older, but it's talking about anger attacks and depression. The really interesting thing is that there's like approximately 1/3 of depressed outpatients present with anger attacks. So this is something that like is kind of confusing for many people. A lot of people who have clinical depression don't realize, because they don't feel sad. What they do is they get pissed. And they just have a very, very short fuse. And then they think they like kind of need to chill out and stuff. But like really what it looks like is it resembles a clinical depressive episode. It manifests as anger. So the interesting thing is that there are some studies, and this guy, the guy who wrote this paper, was telling me that when he has patients who have depression with anger attacks, he'll provide treatments like ropinirole, which actually seem to help depression with anger attacks. And ropinirole is also a treatment for restless leg. So there's like some comorbidity there for sure, and we don't really know too much about it. If y'all have depression and restless leg, definitely go see a psychiatrist, right? And look into that kind of stuff. It's cool. Science is neat, man. There's like so much information out there. I couldn't find the paper itself in my drive, so sorry about that, but that's the reference if you guys want it. Okay. Restless leg syndrome is a neurologic condition where your legs will just like kick. Like, so you know that sometimes you'll have muscle twitches, right? So like sometimes we just like twitch. So in restless leg syndrome, oftentimes when people try to go to sleep, their legs will kick. It can be quite profound, can keep people from sleeping, and can also keep people from sleeping next to you. It's actually quite debilitating, like, or it can be quite debilitating, I should say. Yeah. Okay. Next one. All right. So Now we're going to take a look at another post. I want to live life to the fullest, but I don't know how. Bit of background. 23 and from the UK, fell into major depression, anxiety rut after leaving high school, and have been piecing together my life the last 2 or 3 years. The rut started because of a realization of death. Interesting. It sent me into a panic mode and instantly, and it was always on my mind every single day for at least a year. Wow, that sounds terrible. I'd have constant panic attacks, which led to agoraphobia and nowadays social anxiety. Thankfully, the fear of death has subsided, but it's left a feeling of wanting more out of life. It's almost given me pressure to go out and do things I want to do because life is so short. I've been playing catch up the last few years, seeing my past friends go to university and graduate whilst I was homebound was honestly soul-crushing. I never thought I would have been in that position. I'd speak to peers online and have to make up lies about my situation because I was so embarrassed to tell them my story. At one point, I couldn't walk outside my house. It was that bad. And it was even more hurtful seeing people I knew having the time of their lives whilst I was stuck and helpless. At times, it felt like the world had moved on and I was left behind with no direction or path. It still does feel like that sometimes. I'm in a position now where I see friends moving on, family members moving on with their lives, etc. I feel ready to move on and pursue the life that I've always wanted to live, but for some reason, I'm scared. My anxiety has lessened, but I still don't go out much. I'm still anxious around people and still insecure with who I am. I've accepted my anxiety and have made massive progress, but I still feel left behind. How do I even begin to just go my own way? Throughout those years where my mental health was at its worst, I couldn't do what I wanted to do. But now that I feel okay, I still don't feel ready to just go out there and do it. How do I overcome this? I have dreams of becoming a tattooist. I'm drawing every day, but I don't feel ready yet. I've wanted to start going to the gym and get some gains, but I don't feel ready. I want to connect with old friends and have a good time, but I don't feel prepared enough. I'm too anxious. What if they ask me how I've been doing these last few years? Every single thing I want to do has an excuse of not feeling ready. But why am I like this when I have this fear of death pressuring me to just go out and live life to the fullest because we're all going to go someday? I feel like if I don't address this now, I will regret it the older I get. I don't want to look back on my life and I feel ashamed. I want to feel proud of who I became and what I did. So part of the reason we're sharing this is that this is a story of someone who had anxiety, had depression, fell behind, right? So it sounds like maybe they dropped out of school for a little bit or something like that. We're not entirely sure. And now they've made progress, right? So their anxiety is a lot better. They still sometimes feel that way. They've accepted their anxiety. They're like starting to get better. And so the tricky thing is like when we have sort of a clinical diagnosis like depression or anxiety, and we're not able to do stuff, we've got an excuse, right? And this is one of the problems I think with mental health today is that we'll treat the depression and anxiety and then we enter this sort of like intermediate period where like my anxiety is better, maybe I'm not as agoraphobic, maybe the panic attacks have gotten better, the fear of death has gotten better, but I still can't do what I want to do. I don't feel ready. I've fallen behind. And so it's almost like, in physical injuries, we have this idea of rehab. So you have the stroke and then you have the stroke care, right? Maybe you'll do a TPA or like whatever. You do some kind of procedure. And then there's this sort of assumption that like after you have a big physical injury, let's say you break a bone, with physical medicine, we're really, really good at sort of saying like, okay, we're going to give you medical care, right? You're going to have the surgeon who's going to come and fix your leg. They're going to put nails in it or whatever, screws. And then you're going to go see a physical therapist for 6 months and get back to where you were. So in physical medicine, we have a good injury control, rehabilitation to back to where you are. Okay? When it comes to mental health care, this is missing, right? So like we'll have treatments for anxiety. We'll have treatments for depression, but what do you do afterward? Right? So like now you're 23, your friends are all way ahead of you. Like, how do you deal with that? And so there's a big part of this. So what we're going to do is kind of approach this in a couple of different ways. One thing is I'm not going to go too much into the concept of falling behind, because there's a whole video about that on Dr. K's guide in the depression module. There's a samskar of fallen behind, where that comes from, things like that, how to deal with that. We're still going to talk about it some, but if you guys are really interested in that and that resonates with you, that's kind of, we already have that there. So we're going to focus on other things today. So then what happens is like you've kind of fallen behind, right? You've missed out on some years. So when I've missed out on something, I need to make up for it, right? So now like you have this fear of death. You've missed out on a couple years. You want to live life to the fullest, but you're paralyzed. You're not ready. So what's going on there? What does it mean to be not ready? Why do we need to be ready? What are we looking for? So the first thing to understand is that if the number one reason why we don't do things when we want to do things, I mean, I don't know if it's the number one reason, is not being ready. This concept of readiness is something that's very, very dangerous. It's very, very sneaky, and it keeps us very paralyzed. So one thing, let's try to dig into this a little bit, okay? So what is readiness? When I feel ready, how do I feel, right? Because this is like, I don't feel ready. What do we think of? What are we shooting for when we want to feel ready? We feel confident. We feel prepared. So what does readiness sort of mean? It means that I can handle what comes. I'm not 100% sure about what's coming, but I can handle it, right? That's what it means to be ready. So like I'm ready for this test. So whatever the test sends me, I can handle it. So the first thing to understand is that if we've fallen behind and we lack confidence in ourselves, what is that going to do to our sense of readiness? Now, what I mean by that is like feeling ready and being ready are two entirely different things. And the problem is that if you feel insecure, if you lack confidence, if you've fallen behind, as long as you believe that, you will never be ready. Because you can prepare and prepare and prepare, but as long as you lack the confidence, you'll never feel ready. You can be ready. Like, what do you need to be ready to go to the gym? Maybe a bottle of water. That's it. Right? Like, what else do you need? You don't need anything. The whole point is you do the work there. So readiness is tricky because readiness is a problem that is born of our insecurity, which appears to have an external solution. And that's what gets us stuck. Because we go on thinking, okay, let me get these workout clothes, let me get this water bottle, let me start exercising at home. We look at all of these internal solutions, but the source of unreadiness is right here. And it keeps on spewing a feeling of unreadiness. And so we go on like trying to fix our life, trying to fix our life, trying to fix our life, and we never make any progress, even though we're making progress. And so then we don't act. Okay? So the other thing that I kind of want to point out is that like sometimes when we feel insecure, let's like just look at this social example for a second. Our mind will start to project. Okay? So I'm still anxious around people and still insecure with who I am. I've accepted my anxiety and have made massive progress, but I still feel left behind. I want to reconnect with my old friends and have a good time, but I don't feel prepared enough. I'm too anxious. What if they ask me how I've been doing these last few years? And we can see this too, where the person kind of says, I never thought I would be in that position. I'd speak to peers online and make up lies about my situation. So in terms of social readiness, I want to reconnect with people. I lie about my situation. What's going on there? So what's wrong with saying, you know, last 2 or 3 years have been rough. The pandemic hit me hard. I actually got like hit with really bad anxiety and depression, and it really threw me off. And like, honestly, it took years to just get over the anxiety. And now I'm putting my life back together. What's wrong with saying that? Right? So then people will say, well, like, what will people think? They'll think I'm pathetic. Now, let's understand, be careful. Let's understand, If you think that sharing your life will make other people think you're pathetic, where does that idea come from? Why does your mind conclude that someone else will think you're pathetic? Right? So like, I mean, this has been my experience that when you share with someone that you're struggling and you're making progress and stuff like that, as long as like you don't monopolize the conversation about it and mention it at every turn, and you actually hang out and have a good time, I actually think most people will respect you for that. And it's not like the last 2 or 3 years have been easy on most people, right? Let's be honest. Like the pandemic has accelerated how bad mental health is. Everyone's been on the struggle bus. People who say like, I've been on the struggle bus, oftentimes will open the door for connection because everyone else has been struggling, but no one wants to say it. So we all lie to each other that everything is okay. And then we don't engage with each other and we become further isolated because we don't want to share how much we're struggling. So where does it come from? It comes from here, right? Because what we do, this is like human nature, we insert into the minds of other people the way that we think ourselves. So it's the person who has the affair that is paranoid that their partner is cheating on them. Right? It's the person who trusts other human beings who gets taken advantage of. Right? Until they learn. So we assume that other people will come to the same conclusions we have. That's just how the mind works. It's how our empathic circuitry works. So since you feel like you're pathetic, if people knew that, if they saw you, they would come to the same conclusion. Whereas like that's not actually usually the case. Right? Usually like when people think someone is pathetic, it's not because they're actually struggling. It's because of the way in which they advertise their patheticness. So there's something to be learned there for sure. But generally speaking, the reason that you think everyone's going to think this way is because you feel that way about yourself. So I'll give you like another example. Eating disorders. Someone can have a BMI of 14 and think they're overweight, and they'll be embarrassed to wear a swimsuit because everyone else is going to think I'm so fat. I'm so fat, I'm so disgusting. Everyone else is going to think that way too. I use that as an example because like hopefully y'all understand some about eating disorders and you can see how that's just like, that's not how other people are going to think, right? You can have someone who's got an eating disorder and other people will be telling them you're underweight, you need to gain weight, you need to gain weight. And the person with the eating disorder, if they've got it in their head that they're overweight, no amount of like stuff is going to change that. So that's when it rises to the clinical level where like they're very impervious to feedback and stuff like that. But even remember that clinical pathology oftentimes is an amplification of what actually exists within us. So everyone can feel sad. When it rises to a certain level, we call it depression. Everyone worries about the future. When it rises to a certain level, we call it anxiety. Everyone is worried about what people think. When it rises to a particular level, we call it social anxiety. And eating disorders, the opinions of others, projecting our judgments onto how other people are going to perceive us is human nature. That's how we work. That's the nature of empathy, right? So I can understand what that person is thinking because I can think it myself. There are all kinds of other little things. Like, so gift giving is a good example of this, where for some people giving gifts is like a huge, huge show of like a particular, it means something in a relationship. For other people, gift giving is more casual, right? So like when I don't get a gift, I interpret that as my partner does not love me and does not care about me because that's what it means to me. It may mean something completely different to him. Or the flip side is I didn't get my partner a gift and I'm torn up with guilt because gifts are very important to me, but my partner really doesn't care that much. They're totally fine with it. They don't, not that big of a deal. So we project our own judgments onto other people. Okay? So the key thing to understand here is when you don't feel ready, there's being ready and there's feeling ready. And feeling ready comes from you. Some amount of preparation can help for sure, right? So like, I don't feel ready for a test. I may not actually be ready for a test. Maybe I'll study. Hopefully it'll help. So I'm not saying don't prepare at all. But then there's kind of another angle to this, which is a little bit more almost spiritual in nature. So this is a person who's afraid of death and has missed out on something. So why is readiness important? Because you have to make up for it. And if you have to make up for it, it has to be perfect. right? If I have an F on my transcript, I can't afford to get a B because I'm already behind. I absolutely need an A or even an A plus and extra credit. And so then what happens is my mind is unsatisfied with a B, unsatisfied with a C, unsatisfied with a D. The only thing it'll look for is an A, and a guaranteed A at that. Because if I don't get an A and it winds up being a B, then I'm screwed and I've fallen further behind and I had this opportunity to make things up and I can't make it up. So what does that readiness mean? Readiness means a guarantee of an A. So if you're afraid of death and you need to make up and you want to live life to the fullest, what readiness means is knowing that you will live life to the fullest. But that's never going to happen. So then you get stuck. And so some people may think, I want to live life to the fullest. Why can't I fucking do anything? And it's because you want to live life to the fullest that you can't do anything. Because the only thing you're willing to do is when you know you can live life to the fullest. So paradoxically, it's not like these two things are at odds. They're one and the same. Because how can you go to a party if it doesn't go perfectly? How can you go to a party? You've missed out on so many parties. So this party that I have to go to, I need to be confident. I need to have a good time. I need to have an answer. I need to say something I can be proud of. Because if I can't say something that I'm going to be proud of, I'm not going to have a good time. I'm going to miss out. And then it's just like, it's all over again. I've been traumatized by this once. I don't want to do it again. Never again, never again, never again. I need to be ready. This party needs to be hype. I need to have the best time of my life because I'm 23 years old and I've missed 2 or 3 years of my life. And I need to make up for it. So I want to be ready. So how do you deal with this? This is where we lean on spirituality. So the first thing to understand is that when we think about readiness, we want things to be good. We want things to be perfect. We don't want things to be painful. So this is the other thing about readiness. Readiness is the avoidance of pain at its essence. Because when I'm ready, I can handle it. And bad things don't have to happen, and I can avoid the pain. When I can hold my head up high and they ask me, what have you been up to? I can answer freely and speak with pride. I don't have to lie. Even if I lie, I feel guilty on the inside. Oh my God. And if I speak the truth, it's so shaming. So do you see, I have a choice. Once I'm ready, I don't have to experience that shame. I don't have to experience that guilt. Readiness is an antidote to those things. It's the avoidance of those things. Because when I'm ready, I have nothing to worry about. I won't feel any anxiety. I won't feel any shame. I won't feel any guilt once I'm ready. When am I ready to go to the gym? When I'm ripped. Then I don't have to feel like I'm out of shape. I don't have to feel like other people are judging me. I don't have to be ashamed of myself. I don't have to be pathetic when the person at the gym swipes me in and then 15 minutes later I leave and they're thinking, this guy's not cut out for it. They're not thinking about you. But it doesn't matter, right? That's what you think. Like if I was working at a gym, I saw someone come for a little while and then leave. It's like, hey, at least they made it. I've been there. There are too many days where I have chosen not to go for 15 minutes and just stayed at home instead. And the next day, I wish I had gone for 15 minutes. But the 15 minutes is a C. We can't have Cs because we're so far behind. So readiness is the avoidance of pain. So what do you do with this? The first is on a fundamental spiritual level. If you want to wipe this away, root and stem, and leaf and flower, all of it, understand that life is a totality. That part of the experience of life is pain. Right? That's the nature of things. Like if you want to become healthy, you're going to be huffing and puffing for a while. Like that's just how it is. Right? If I want to get good at a video game, I'm going to go in and like get owned. Like I tried PvPing for the first time like a week ago in Lost Ark and like got absolutely demolished. And that's just the price of life. That's what happens. Like life is going to be a totality. Life is not perfect. Right? Life is not all positive. Now, the problem is that society has developed in such a way where it deludes us into thinking it's all positive. It deludes us into thinking that like pure happiness is possible. How did this happen? Because of things like social media. Oh my God, look at all these people out there being so happy. So if I log into Facebook or Instagram and I see all these posts of people having a great time, I think this is what life is. Right? Even when we talk about depression, you know what what posts get upvoted the most on Reddit when people talk about depression? They're the ones that are like, I kicked my depression's ass. 40,000 upvotes. I finally stopped letting depression take advantage of me, and I cleaned my room. Here's before and here's after. Even the people struggling with depression are absolute chads. There's the way that the good people handle depression, absolute chad, and then there's me. I can't even clean. Like, I wish I was like, man, I wish I had that kind of depression. Because, like, their depression is, like, turning them into a good person. It's like, look at how, like, much they're growing as a human. I can't even clean my fucking sink. Think about that. The triumph of the human spirit is how we represent adversity. It's not the failure of the human spirit. The truth is, most of the time, it's failure of the human spirit. There's a reason why that one post gets upvoted and we have 1,000 posts about depression is kicking my ass and one post about I conquered my depression. Right? That's why they're stories. That's why they propagate, because they're the exception. So readiness is the avoidance of pain. Readiness is your mind's way of telling you, hey, if you get ready, it doesn't have to hurt. You don't have to lie anymore. Well, you don't have to lie now. It's just the only thing is you're going to have to deal with a little bit of shame. So understand that life is both. And the big irony, this is why readiness is so fucking paralyzing. The big irony is it's the person who looks for readiness to be the avoidance of pain that never winds up doing anything and is never ready. The person who is actually ready is doing the opposite. They're the one who's saying, you know what? This is the best I'm going to do. I'm never going to be ready. I might as well go. And that's readiness. It's the acceptance of pain. That life is a totality. It's not just like one way. And you can't escape from that other piece. Right? That's the other big thing that we just like all need to understand. Is like you just can't escape. There's no way to escape from the suffering that is life. That's what Buddha said when he talked about dukkha. He's like, there's no pass. You can use drugs for a while if you want to, not going to fix the problem. It'll delude you into thinking it. You can pretend it doesn't exist by spending time on the internet. You can look at other people who triumph and say, oh, I want to get to that point. But what they don't understand, like you don't see the 1,000 other days before my clean kitchen where I struggled. We don't advertise the nasty parts. We don't advertise the boring parts. So we give ourselves a false perception. So accept life in its totality. Accept that it's going to suck. Accept that this is the price you pay. You fell behind. You were cursed with depression. Bad RNG. This is the consequence. That has nothing to do with you. Right? You can maybe take some actions here or there. You spawned with fear of death, depression, anxiety, and agoraphobia. Right? You're now 23. And like, you're behind. So be it. Once you accept that life is a totality, then like readiness is no longer necessary and you can act. Because you don't have to get an A. You can get a B. A B is still going to improve your average. Right? And then you can maybe get an A next time. So you want to live life to the fullest. But it's your desire to live life to the fullest that keeps you living life. Why don't you just start fucking living life and then you'll get to fullest eventually. But you're never going to find it ahead of time. That's the essence of it, right? It's like, I want to live life to the fullest. Like, why don't you just start living? Start living halfway, bro or girl. Start living halfway, but that's not enough. So be it. It's never going to be enough. What is fullest? How do you live life to the fullest? What does that mean? Like, think about what is this thing that you're chasing? I want to live life to the fullest. Like, tell me, what is that? It's not a thing. Does it mean going to a party with 15 people? Does it mean going to 15 parties a week? Does it mean going to a single party? It's an unsolvable problem. Stop trying to live life to the fullest and just start living life, whatever it has to offer. When you start living life, whatever it has to offer, that's when you get the fullness of life. Because the fullness of life is not just positive. The fullness of life is pain and pleasure. This is why our literature is the way that it is. It's not, you know, we don't have movies about, I was born rich and every day of my life has been easy and good. and in the end, I win. That's not the movie. The movie is pain and pleasure together. Triumph over adversity. Accept both. That's how you live life to the fullest. Shooting for just the pleasure, that's not life to the fullest. That's half of life. You're afraid of living half of life, and that causes you to live half of life. You're afraid, you want to live life to the fullest, and you're living half of life. Instead, live half the life, and you'll live a life of fullness. Whatever it has to offer, take it. That's like literally, that's life. So I'm going to leave y'all with kind of a spiritual scripture. This is, I guess you could call it, it's called a prayer. It's not really a prayer. So the concept of prayer is like a Western thing. Well, it's not just a Western thing, but it's not really a prayer. So this is a segment. It's a set of sutras from one of the Upanishads of the Hindu tradition. And people turned it into a prayer, but really it's like an explanation of things. It's like science more than spirituality. You're not asking for anything. You're not beseeching anyone. So it's not like that. But people use it as a prayer. But it's really like it's a nugget of wisdom that people will chant and will meditate on. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purna Purnachete Purnasta Purnamayadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. There's a whole. Like not whole, like H-O-L-E, like the whole, W-H-O-L-E. You can take a piece out of the whole, and the whole still remains whole. Interestingly enough, the whole is still represented within the piece. The whole is not diminished by removing a piece from it. Right? So you guys don't need to chant that thing, but I want y'all to really think about the next time you meditate. So as you do a formal meditation practice, think a little bit about the totality of life. What is life? Just look around and observe. Use the full of your focus to observe and ask yourself, what the is this? You're so afraid of death, like forget about death, like start figuring out life. Why are you so concerned about death? Like forget about death. What you need to figure out is what you're doing here. So what is the totality of life? Think about it. What does life have to offer? And hopefully you'll understand that in life, there's just it. And any kind of positive you try to create out of it will create a negative on the flip side. Any kind of negative that you experience will also have a positive. That's just how it works. If I split a neutron, I don't just get a proton, or I don't just get an electron. I get a proton and an electron. Right? If I break a cookie in half, I'm going to get 2 equal pieces. Like there's just no way that you can get 1 + 1 = 3. It's just not possible. And life is the same way. All pain has pleasure associated with it. All pleasure has pain associated with it. And if you disagree with that, you could disagree with that logically if you want to, whatever, but experience it. Right? And people will say, but all I experience is pain. I don't experience pleasure. Well, that's because you're not there yet. That's been my experience anyway. So I've come to understand the wisdom of the sutra. And it's like, it's staggering and will be transformative if you ever get it. Question. Okay, this is a great question. What does it mean to not be there yet? What it means to be not there yet is a false understanding of how things work. Because there is no yet and there is no there. Those are both conceptions of the mind. All that exists is what is, and all that exists is here. So you will never... I'm not there yet is not something to even think about in its truest sense. I realize I just said that. But that's the honest answer. So if you understand Om Purnamida Purnamidam Purnat Purna, Purnachete Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnaveva Vashishyate. If you understand that, what you'll realize is there's no there and there's no yet. There's only what you do today. Right? There's only where you are now. Are you at the gym? No. Okay, so go there. Right? Be here. Do the thing. That's life. Do that over and over and over and over and over again. Then you will be living life to the fullest. It's that simple. It's hard, but it's simple. Does this lesson sort of relate to just YOLO through life? Sort of. Right? What is YOLO? YOLO is carpe diem. So like, I think the problem here is that sometimes, remember how we were saying that the mind will infuse itself into whatever it perceives, right? So if I'm anorexic and I think I'm overweight, I'm going to assume that other people think I look fat. The challenge with the YOLO carpe diem crowd is that oftentimes there is some kind of like subtle emotional or physical need that they will then use this philosophy to be an asshole. Right? So like, I don't want to feel guilty. I don't want to care about other people. So I'm just going to YOLO it. I don't want to prepare. So I'm going to YOLO. YOLO has become synonymous for forget about consequences. But most people who YOLO are not like, don't behave the same way as enlightened folks. It's, in fact, oftentimes they're very opposite. I don't know if that kind of makes sense to y'all, but it's like, it's a very important distinction. So there's a difference between YOLOing and like acting YOLO. And in acting YOLO, suppressing all of the negativity that you have. That's a false YOLO. Right? So generally, like sometimes they can look similar. But you got to be really careful about what's on the inside. Right? Does that make sense? Don't do the YOLO, be the YOLO. Yeah. Right? So sometimes, because like, let's think about you only live once. So what's that for, right? That's an excuse to get away with crap. Do y'all see that? It's like such a subtle excuse for the slippery ass mind. You only live once. Guess I might as well not do that project. You only live once. I don't need to text this person back. You only live once. Guess I'm going to eat pizza 7 days a week. Right? Like that's not... And by the way, you know, for the record, the meditative tradition does not believe that you only live once. Right? So, I mean, like in general, I think that seize the day is a good idea, right? That's some of the sentiment behind YOLO. That's good. Like enjoy every day to its fullest. That I agree with. But don't try to maximize the fullness, like the enjoyment of every day. That's what a lot of YOLO people do. And in doing so, they actually like live a life of hedonism. Is this similar to the performance mode gifted kids usually rely on? Sort of. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of overlap. So I think falling behind, needing to be ready, you know, being unable to not get an A, all of those things are relevant to gifted kids, for sure. All right? Okay. This is good. So now we have a next question. How does having goals for the future play into what is now? Example, a dream job you're not there, so you should not try because it's not what you are now. Kind of confused about this. Is there no point in anything? Then so why try? Okay, so Epsilon Rook asks a question. And guess what, Epsilon Rook? We have an answer. But not only do we have an answer, someone else asked that same question. So I'm going to give y'all a chance to read this real quick. I'm going to run to the bathroom, right? Because you only live once and got to pee now. Okay. Let's do the next one. Okay? So help. Meditation is turning me stoic. I've been doing some meditation the past 3 to 4 years, and now I've discovered Dr. K. I've started doing it even more often. However, what I've realized is that in the safe space of my existence, where there's only my I and no turbulence, I'm so comfortable that I never want to leave, and it feels like the only real thing to my existence. For example, yesterday night, I was laying in bed thinking what tattoo I want to get next, and then it struck me that the I on the inside does not really care about tattoos. The I doesn't really care about anything. It just exists. So if I tune into that, the more I feel like all my wants are completely erased. But then what's the point of living? Just to sit with that emotion of not wanting anything until I rot away? How do I practice meditation without feeling like things in my material world stop mattering? Or is this enlightenment? Realizing nothing matters and I can just sit there in my head and meditate until I pass away. But if so, why do monks and such keep on living? What do I do when I easily can tap into the I safe space of myself? Live? Because I don't really feel like there's any motivation to anything. Editing in one of my replies in the comments here, I do get a boost from creating, working on self-development, or helping others. However, I feel like all these things classify as material. It's not my inner I that gets a kick. It's my ego that likes feeling good about itself. My inner self just observes. It feels like it doesn't really care about these things. I'm also at a happy and stable point in life, so I wouldn't say that I'm using meditation as a form of escapism. Okay. Fantastic post. So, sometimes when people start meditating, it starts working. What does that mean? So let's run through a couple of relevant details here. So the person is sitting in bed thinking about what tattoo they want next. And then they realize, like, where is this desire coming from? I don't really need a tattoo. It's just like, I'm content in here. I don't need it. So as we meditate and as we get in touch with our inner selves, let's also remember that this person is relatively stable and happy in life, right? We start to recognize that, like, this is kind of weird. Like, I don't really need all of this stuff that I thought I needed before. My wants and desires start to go away, which is like one of the benefits of meditation. So here we are, most of us, caught up in our desires. I want this, I want this, I want this, right? I want people to love me. I want to be respected. I want to be able to hold my head up with pride. I want to be able to get the hell out of my house. I want to be more physically in shape. I want this person's love. I want more money. I want more stuff. And the problem with chasing desires is that it's the hedonistic treadmill. So I want a promotion, but am I content then? No. I want another promotion. I make $100,000 a year. Now I want 120. He's getting 120. I didn't get promoted this year. I want a tattoo. And what does this person want? Which tattoo am I getting next? So the problem with desire is that there's always a next. So despite whatever kind of fulfillment you do, there's more fulfillment to be had. So we start meditating. Then as we meditate, we start to become a little bit less materialistic. We start to, like, understand ourselves more. We find a space of contentment within us, which, by the way, is what all these people who are depressed and addicted and all that kind of stuff, that's what they're looking for. That's why we teach people meditation, by the way, so they can find the space where I am content. I don't need something else. I don't need to feel shame. Or even if I feel ashamed, the shame is there because your desire for the tattoo is still there, right? Let's be clear. It's just the desire for the tattoo no longer dictates your actions. So even as you start to meditate, you don't feel less. You don't become numb. You still feel guilt. You still feel shame. But that guilt and shame controls you less. That's why meditation is so powerful. So another thing to kind of point out is that this kind of state happens to more to people who are stable and happy in life. So this is what meditation was designed for. It was never designed as a treatment to fix what's broken. It was designed as taking someone who's stable and helping them become super normal. It's all the same, actually, but we'll just steer clear of that for a second. So then we run into a problem if we start to meditate successfully. And now I have to toss out a disclaimer here, which is that if you're just keep meditating, don't worry about this being the success that you should shoot for. Trying to attain this state will interfere with your ability to attain it. So for whatever reason you meditate, that's fine. You don't need to get here. You don't need to try to get here or anything like that, okay? This is a consequence of meditating. So for whatever reason you use to meditate, you will eventually get to this place, okay? The goal doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter why you're running. If you run for 5 miles a day, there will be changes to your body that will definitely happen, right? You will lose weight. Your cardiovascular health will improve, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, okay? So then this creates a problem for a lot of competent yet novice meditators, which is that I've lived my whole life. And in fact, the structure of life is based on ambition, on wanting things. That's what our culture is designed on, right? So if we look at things like social media and like we look at like targeted advertising and cookies, right? So like online cookies. We live in a society that tries to create materialistic need. Hey, by the way, so you can just follow fashion trends. By the way, I know that some people paint their nails, and did you know that you can paint the 4th nail slightly differently? And we're going to add a little bit something onto that. And then everyone starts kind of doing it, and then everyone's like, oh, like my nails aren't good enough, and now let me go pay an extra $3 for like this additional thing. That's what our society bases itself on, right? Even we're guilty of this. Look, merch store, right? Hey, there's stuff you can buy, right? So this is the way that society works, where it's all based on ambition and desire, triumph. Elon Musk now owns this percentage of Twitter. That's something that someone out there is aspiring to. I wish I was a mega billionaire. Then I could do this. So we build our lives on ambition. Oh, like little Jimmy, little Timmy, little Lucy, little Prakash. You know, like whatever. Little Jose. Get A's. If you get A's, you'll get a good job. If you get a good job, you'll make lots of money. If you make lots of money, you'll be a desirable mate. If you're a desirable mate, you'll marry someone who you love and who's awesome and attractive. Then you'll have babies, and then you'll have this beautiful, perfect life. This is the road to happiness. It's based on ambition and accomplishment. So as you meditate, it's really confusing because this goes away. And now you're like, well, hold on a second. Ambition and desire is how I have structured my life and has been the source of my motivation. And let's be clear, it can be a very good source of motivation, right? Very good source of motivation. That's why most people do it. Now, as you start to like become, as you put it, stoic, you're like, I don't feel like doing anything because I'm kind of content. So this is not where a lot of people get confused because they think like, how do I live life now? And this is where I'd say this is actually when you start living life. People prior to the state aren't truly living it. They're chasing desires. That's not living life. So once you find contentment within yourself, a couple of very important things start to happen. The first is that opportunity cost shrinks. So like when I'm chasing desire, it's hard for me to pick one thing over another thing. My ability to pick is actually constrained by my desire. So when I lack contentment on the inside, I need to eat a slice of pizza instead of a salad because I get more from the pizza. The pizza brings me more happiness because I'm fundamentally not content in here. And so I choose pizza over salad, or I choose playing video games over studying. So this is one of the benefits of meditation that people discover as you learn to be content within yourself. Is you're thinking about ordering a salad, you're like, oh, I want the pizza. Tap into that piece and say, I'm going to order salad. And you'll be like, you know what? It's totally fine. I can order pizza and I can enjoy it the same as salad. Now you've activated God mode in life. As long as you can do this, your choices are exactly what you want them to be and are not going to be influenced by desire. You can do whatever you want to. Because for you, like, it's the same. right? If you're equally content with a tattoo or without a tattoo, you never have to get another tattoo. And so then people may wonder, but then like, how do I choose? Which is something you'll learn. So here's what you should do. Engage in life. Experiment. See what else is out there, right? So what I would say is do whatever you kind of feel like doing. And I realize the whole point is you may not feel like doing much. So I'd say like live life, but live life from this perspective. And what you'll discover is that like all of it is way more joyous. And so like, I don't know how to say this, but when we play a video game, like why do we play the video game if it's not real? Like what does it matter if I use a sword or a bow in a video game? What does it matter if I go mage build or bonk build in Elden Ring? What does it matter? It doesn't matter, right? It's not like global warming will get better in either situation. It's not like, you know, we're going to fix world hunger. It's not like we're going to clean the oceans by going bonk build over mage build. It doesn't matter. And yet we can do it, and we do it with so much more joy. So the other thing that starts to happen is that life becomes more like a video game, but in the best possible ways. It becomes less important whether I do things one way or the other, and so it just sort of becomes like a simple enjoyment. And then life transforms into something called lila. So as you move towards enlightenment, the word for reality, the word in Sanskrit that gets translated into English as reality is technically translated as play, but scholars will translate it as reality. So like life becomes play. It becomes joyous. It becomes fun. No matter what you do, you're having a good time. And so then you can choose freely. And so just like then you could say, but how do I choose? Well, that's based on the internal rules of the game. So then you start playing the game of life, right? So like, even though nothing is real, like how do you choose something in a video game? Because it's based on the internal rules. So there's like an internal set of rules which we're going to play by. And life is the same way. So if you want to get a job, you should get a job. Part of the rules of life, or generally speaking, we should try out this relationship stuff. So let's try it out and let's try to enjoy it and see if it's for us. And then you'll kind of come to a very simple experiential-based conclusion. This is good. I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to get a tattoo. I'm not going to get a tattoo. You become free from the constraints of desire, which allows you to actually engage more fully with life. And so what's confusing is people think that the opposite of ambition is apathy, which in a sense, apathy and ambition are opposites. But when you meditate, this is why people use the word transcend. You transcend that axis. You transcend the axis of like ambition and apathy into just like enjoyment and freedom. And so this is why even as people talk about enlightenment, they call it bliss. They call it freedom. Like those, do y'all get how those are like, in the English language, those are not synonyms. Bliss and freedom are not in the same ballpark at all. And enlightenment implies knowledge. Like what is going on here? Like these are not similar things. But as you progress spiritually, you will get to a state of mind, which when boiled down to translation, you know, like when we reduce things to the state of language and logic, which is not really like what reality is, right? So reality is not dictated by human logic. Human logic is an attempt to approximate reality. And so we use these kinds of words. So as you progress, just live. By all means, play by the rules, and you will see that things are more joyous. The other thing that happens, you still have a long way to go. Are you enlightened yet? I don't think so. Let me show you why. So the other thing that happens when we start to meditate is we conquer the big problems. And by big, I mean like not more important. I mean the things that are more visible. So I was lying in bed thinking what tattoo I want to get next, and then it struck me that the eye on the inside does not really care about tattoos. The eye doesn't care about anything. And then, so okay, fine. You're uncaring here, or you're enlightened with this thought, sure. So if I tune into that more, all my wants are completely erased, but then what's the point of living? Just sit with emotion of not wanting until I rot away? See, this is an unenlightened thought. This word rot away, there's an attachment. You see that? So like you're free over here, but you're not free over here. Right? Like this is a problem for you, which is why you're making the post. But it's subtle. So this is where, in meditation, the problems that we deal with are subtler and subtler and subtler. They get smaller and smaller and smaller. Right? So it's like we pick the low-hanging fruit, which is desire over a tattoo, and then we get to other things. So then we also see like another thing changing, because I don't really feel like there's any motivation to things, but I do get a boost from creating, working on self-development, and helping others. This is another quality of people who meditate. They become more altruistic. They become more creative. They improve as human beings. So this is absolutely in the right direction. This is the reason why many people meditate. You may not be doing it for these advantages, which is good. It's not the right reason to do it. Not really a right reason. But all of these consequences will start to change. You'll become more materialistically successful. Your relationships will improve. Your understanding of the self will improve. However, I feel like all these things classify as material. Here's your problem number 2. So now that we've got a real meditator, we're going to go into subtleties. Classification, this can never classify. Do y'all understand that? The mind of a meditator can never classify. Classification is of the mind. It's not, it doesn't come from transcendence of mind. It comes from operation within mind. It's not my inner eye that gets the kick. It's my ego that likes feeling good about itself. So let's go even subtler. What's wrong with your ego getting a kick? Why do we place a value judgment on ego getting a kick is bad and the internal state is good? Why do we place a value judgment on the inner self over the ego? So now what we see with people who are good meditators is these are the next questions that come up. It's beautiful. This person is doing wonderful. But now the challenges that you face are more subtle. You've leveled up, but you're far from finishing the game. Like, we're just getting started. Like, you just completed the tutorial, my friend. And so now you dig into these things. So then ask yourself, what's it like having an ego that's gratified? So let's remember that there's a reason why we have an ego, right? The ego serves a purpose. Ego isn't bad. Ego in control is bad. You being in control of your ego is perfectly fine. And then you ask the question, what is the I in that sentence? Or what is the you? And it's not the ego, it's that transcendent self. So what should you do very practically? I'd say, first of all, you're on a fantastic track. Just keep doing what you're doing. But live life more fully. So engage more and observe. Now you're centered in your capacity of observation. So now you can learn. So now you should go and do different things. Like, go find a romantic relationship if you don't have one. Go get promoted. Go swimming. Do all of these different experiences and see what life has to offer. Because now you can live life to the fullest because you're not constrained by a desire. Now you can actually enjoy stuff. So like now we're in the video game and we're like vibing, right? So the enlightened person vibes with life. More practically, you may be ready for deeper spiritual practice now that you have this observing self. So if you have the opportunity to learn more mystical, esoteric, advanced, or powerful meditation, I would strongly recommend that, depending on what your goals are and stuff like that. I think you're probably, because it requires a certain amount of like centering to be able to tolerate that kind of stuff. And unless you're centered in this way, that's when people do powerful meditation techniques. I personally think we don't really have good data on this. We know there's meditation-induced psychosis, but I think when you're grounded in this way, you're hopefully won't become psychotic if you do a powerful meditation technique. That's been my experience anyway. And that's how they're taught in traditions. So the last thing is that this is one of the cases where I think that, really finding a good spiritual tradition will help you a lot. So like gurus are kind of, you got to be careful in a sense, but this is why gurus exist. The real role of a guru is to guide this person. Because chances are they're not going to find the answers to things like in logic or in books or in other places. So you really need someone who's like spiritually like advanced to understand what you're experiencing and then like guide you effectively. And hopefully, ideally, give you appropriate techniques to help you work on this stuff. But I'd say you can still, but the essence of it is the same. You've already mastered the main moves. So much like a video game, like, you go through the tutorial, you know all the moves. Like, that's all the moves. The game gets harder, but you just have to use those moves in a more sophisticated way. You have to use those moves against more difficult enemies. So then, like, think about that sense of rot, right? Can you sit with contentment while you rot away? Of course not. Then you wouldn't use the word rot. Okay, so where does that come from? So there you'll find a subtler desire. Can you let that go? No, I can't. So be non-judgmental towards that. Okay, I'm going to hold on to that desire. So be it. Right? I'm in this world. It's my karma to have some of these things, so let me pursue them. And as you go on this path, so many of these things that people talk about will become very clear to you. What is karma? You'll understand this now. Now you're truly able to understand what karma is. So like, if I'm internally content, why the hell am I here? It's because I have all of these karmas to complete. Now you'll understand why you're here. You're not here for the sake of being here. You're here because you owe this world something. And then as you complete those things, you'll be free. So it's even said in sort of the karmic traditions that after someone gains enlightenment, they take one more birth. Why is that? It's because they still have karma left over. So as long as they don't re-engage in additional karma, they kind of like, it's like probate, I think, after someone passes away, right? It's like settling the estate, which happens after you die. So this is the kind of stuff that I think is like tricky, because I think that like this is where we really have to, if you really want to understand what's going on here, I feel like I have to lean way more on the spiritual tradition, far away from science and even away from logic, because logic like falls apart at some point. And I cannot emphasize this enough. Like once you understand spiritual experience, you'll realize that logic is not real, right? It's a human conception. It's our human mind's ability to organize reality. So even if we think about things like the laws of physics, like the laws of physics stop working at the quantum level. I barely even know what that means, but that's what people who are knowledgeable in physics say. Like, how is that logical? Like, the laws of physics just stop? It's like, I'm going to zoom in, laws of physics work. I'm going to zoom in, laws of physics work. I'm going to zoom in, laws of physics work. Zoom in a little bit more. Laws of physics stopped working. Now, I'm sure there is a logic to it. I'm sure there's a system to it, because that's the way the world works, right? It just exists in a particular way. Logic is the way that we try to understand it, but that's filtered through the shortcomings of the human mind. And so that's why, like, I can't teach this kind of stuff, because all you're going to get is like logical explanation. But you have to be here first. Then you'll truly understand. Questions? Yeah, so someone's saying, Plato would like to have a word with you, so would mathematicians. Logic is only a perception and not some intrinsic property of how the world works. No, so the world works with logic, for sure. Human logic is different from the world's logic, right? That's why we make observations in the world that are not logical. Then we have to adapt our human logic to better fit the harmony of the world. I don't know if that's a better answer. Right? And mathematicians can have a word, but that's just words. It's not reality, right? So like reality is one thing. Our representation of reality as humans is something else. We tend to get closer and closer. That's what science is about. Science is about understanding how do we reconcile that which is illogical. And then we learn, we adapt our human logic and our human understanding closer to reality. But that reality is out there and our human logic is over here and we're getting closer and closer and closer. It's unclear whether that relationship is asymptotic. So isn't it then nihilistic? Also, how do we know what to do in such a state if there are no desires or difference to it at all? I'm lost. Yeah, that's why you have to experiment. That's my point. This is a hard thing to understand unless you're already here. So what I'd say is if you're in this place, go and engage in life. And you'll learn at a level that you've never learned before because of the capacity of your observing self. All right, food will taste different. You'll struggle for a while. And then you'll discover, like, it's way easier than you ever thought it was. It's hard to describe. It's just way easier. So what meditation is recommended to reach this point of contentment? It is not a meditation that will bring you to this point of contentment necessarily. So the meditation that's recommended is not based on where you go. It is sort of, but the biggest requirement of what meditation is not based on where you want to go, but where you are. Right? So if you were to ask me, what would you recommend if I want to learn quantum mechanics? I could say, go sign up for a quantum mechanics course. But if you're 5 and you don't understand arithmetic, that's not going to help you very much, even though it's the right answer. So if you want to get somewhere, everyone's concerned about the goal. The bigger question is, where are you? Meditation should be designed for this, not for this. And this is the big problem with meditation. So everyone says, here's a meditation. We do this, right? We fall into this trap. We do it for a reason, because it's the only way to do it. There's the best way to do it that I figured out, which is here's a meditation for this thing. Here's a meditation for this. Here's a meditation for this, meditation for this. Because we've gotten the idea that meditation is for something. That is fundamentally false. Meditation is not for anything. The second you add a for something, it becomes of the world. It stops becoming transcendent. It's not. So why do we do that? To trick people into meditating. You trick yourself into this state. You just meditate for a while. It doesn't matter what you do. As long as you keep meditating with any technique, you will get here. If you're meditating properly, that is. Transcendence can be achieved from any of these techniques. It's just figuring out which one is right for you. So it's not about the transcendence, it's about you. So can you sit still? Do you like focusing on your breath? Do you like to move? These are the kinds of questions. Do you want an esoteric practice? Does that excite you more? What gets you to practice the easiest? That's what meditation should be. But aren't you desiring a relationship when you want to try it out? No, quite the opposite. So when you desire something, you have a particular goal or satisfaction in mind. Trying something out is actually the exact opposite, because you have nothing in mind. When you try something for the first time, you cannot have a desire for it. Do y'all get that? Like, your desires, they may be based on conceptions, but that's not the real desire, or it's a desire based on a conception. So to try something out, it's like the first time you try pizza, after that, the desire you'll have for pizza is going to be completely different from anything you had before. So as you start trying things out, like, trying stuff out precedes desire, not the other way around. So life is a to-do list of karma. Life is sort of. Life brings with it a karmic to-do list. But this tidbit that I shared with y'all is, once again, it's like reported, right? So we have no idea if that's true or not. But people from karmic traditions will say that you'll have one last life post-enlightenment to settle your karmas. I have no idea if that's true or not. But for those people, it's a to-do list of karma. Okay, I'm just trying to find questions. Okay, how do you differ between ego and I? So ego is I. So that's why, so even in translation, right? So in Sanskrit, when you look at these texts, they won't use the word I when they're talking about this. They'll use words like this. They'll use words like the self. They'll use words like turiya. Turiya is that which transcends other states. It's like the state that you cannot describe. Right? So ego and I kind of go hand in hand. And so the key thing is that who you truly are is more than your ego. That's the self, which is why we use that term. And is the self I? No. And if they're like, how the hell does that work? That's not logical at all. You have to experience it. Then you'll understand. That's the problem with these spiritual traditions, is that logic, you can't transmit understanding through information. No amount of watching pornography is going to teach you what it's like to have sex. It just can't be done. Or at least I haven't seen a way to figure it out yet. Maybe someone else will be correct. And maybe someone else will figure it out. Okay. Yeah, so I know this last post, so this is the challenge, right? Is like what I tried to do today is get to a lot of different stuff. So there are different people in our community at different stages of their development. And there's also like sort of a sequence, right? So it's nice that we see all of these posts. So I didn't really comment on this, but the nice thing about all of these posts is that all of them are good. All of them show self-reflection. All of them show curiosity. All of them show understanding. And it's just where you are. And it's not like, so even though I sort of implied that one is ahead of the other, it's kind of irrelevant, right? Like if I'm 22 years old and I'm finishing college and there's a 6-year-old who's in the first grade, like one is ahead of the other, but it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's just where we are. Right? So it's not that there's a value judgment on ahead or behind, which is what we put on it, right? That's what our mind does. We just are where we are. You know, like, what if I'm 22 and I'm in the first grade? Then I'm behind. Well, it's like, that's where you are, right? It's not, could you have been anywhere else? Well, that becomes complicated. Okay. Should we meditate? So when someone says, yeah, the 6-year-old is owning the 20-year-old. So here's the thing, you're correct. But that presumes a comparison, right? A comparison implies some kind of judgment. You can't have a comparison without equality. And once you add equality, you're placing a judgment, right? If I say this is hotter than this, that implies a scale, it implies a comparison. Once I name something as hot, I name something as cold. So you're correct. It's just then you've slipped out of not the right kind of thinking. That kind of thinking has value for sure. But it's not the right kind of thinking for this goal. Okay. So by that standard, how do you escape judgment? See, you guys ask the same questions over and over and over again. How do you escape? You don't. Y'all see that? Like everyone's always looking to escape. How do I avoid pain? How do I find ready? How do I become ready? How do I avoid pain? How do I escape judgment? How do I stop feeling this way? You're stuck in a loop. Absolutely. Right? I'm not saying it's bad. It's just notice it. So how would this be different if you were okay with a little bit of pain? If you were okay with some suffering? Right? And this is what, when we say deal with it, that's, sort of. That's not very helpful. So the first thing is just like understand what your mind is trying to do. Because just like if y'all caught the thing about avoidance and being ready, oftentimes it is our desire to escape that traps us the most. Right? It is the avoidance of problems that creates problems. Like that's not, Dr. K doesn't need to explain that to you. Y'all all understand that, right? Oh my God, I only have 7 days left to study. Let me avoid that problem and not study today. Oh my God, I only have 6 days left to study. Oh my God, that's overwhelming. I wasted a day. Let me waste another one. tricky. Someone's saying, this is some crackpot stuff. Dr. K still feels fear, anxiety, pain. He's not some kind of realized Buddha under a Bodhi tree. You're damn right I'm not. And I feel all of those things. So I see people keep on mentioning Jordan Peterson. I've talked briefly about Jordan Peterson before. I don't know if I mentioned this to you guys, but when I was in residency, I watched his course on personality, and I thought it was absolutely phenomenal. I'm not so sure about some of his more recent stuff, but in terms of like his ability to synthesize and explain things, I think it's very good. The other thing is that I don't think neither me nor Jordan Peterson are original thinkers, for the record. I certainly am not. Like, what I teach is not based on original thought. In fact, it's like based on a huge tradition of people who figured things out way before I did. Maybe Jordan Peterson was an original thinker. I don't know. Now, you guys are really, really good at regurgitating derivative information. I completely agree. So if you look at people who tend to be popular on the internet, we're good at transmitting information. We're not necessarily original thinkers. Does that make sense? So like success on the internet is about transmission of information, not original of thought. So I think we're good at explaining things. Yes, we can meditate now. So I thought I was going to, so people are asking questions, how do I become content? How do I let go? Things like that. So also maybe I'm feeling a little bit more on the spiritual side today. So I was going to teach y'all the Shanti mantra. So people are also asking questions about mantras and stuff like that. How do I find my mantra? That's also weird, esoteric, cultish kind of stuff. But so one mantra that I think is safe to share, for lack of a better term, won't induct you into any kind of cult. You can use it if you want to. You cannot use it if you don't want to, is the Shanti mantra. So Shanti means peace. And it's just something that you can kind of chant, right? So we know that from a scientific perspective, chanting stuff, just in general, seems to have positive effects on our mind and has benefits from, evidence-based or scientifically validated benefits. So I don't think that the Shanti mantra will hurt you. The other thing is that for people who are... So the Shanti mantra has a religious connotation to it, but I don't really think that that's an accurate representation. I don't think that you are praying to a particular thing or becoming part of a particular religion by intoning the Shanti mantra. So the Western concept of religion is if you do certain things that makes you a certain kind of religion. So Western religion is very like, there's us and there's them, right? There's like the infidels and the chosen people. Like there's that dividing line, and it's like, these are the things that separate the us from the them. So the Eastern religion, like what happened is people from the West like showed up in the East and they're like, oh, these people have a set of beliefs. That's a religion. So the Shanti mantra is a mantra. It's just a chant to ideally invoke peace. So if you call that, you're not asking a god to do it for you. So it's just an attempt to cultivate peace is the best way that I'd put it. Now, if you think that's religious, you can easily make an argument for that. I'm not saying that you're wrong. It's just not how I see it, which is part of the reason that I teach it. So if I were to teach, and anyway, we may teach religious stuff at some point, but there's some like goddess worship things or like Shiva worship or stuff like that. Like the worshiping stuff, I think is more clearly religion. This seems a little bit different to me. So the Shanti mantra is tricky because most people can't say the word Shanti. So what they say is Shanti. So the first thing that we're going to do to learn the Shanti mantra is we're going to teach you all the proper pronunciation. Does the proper pronunciation matter? Now, I'm going to go ahead and say yes, and the reason I'm going to say yes is because people who I trust told me it mattered. So the first thing we're going to do is learn how to say, so hopefully most people can say Shan, so it's not Shan. So if you think about Shan versus Shan, it's the way that your mouth widens or opens vertically or laterally, right? So if I say Shanti, shanty, it's going like this. And if I say shan, it's opening. So the first thing is shan is like opening tall, and it's kind of weird, but if you just practice that, if you go shan, 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 you'll notice what the difference is, okay? Next thing is the ti. So this is hard, especially from people of like Western cultures. So what they'll say is shanty, right? So it's not, or shanty. It's not shanty, like a shanty town. So that's because when we make the sound T, notice where the tongue is. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in a little bit. T, 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 T. The tongue remains behind the teeth when I say T, 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 T. So just do that for a second. Go 5 times. T, 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 T. Okay? Now what we're going to do is T. So put your tongue between your teeth. T, 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 okay? Y'all got that? So this is how you say shanti. So try it with me now. Shanti, 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 shanti. So you can go slow at the beginning if you want to. You can practice. So I see a lot of people who are like into yoga and like converting to Hinduism and stuff like that. Usually Caucasians or maybe South Americans or things like that. But and then they'll really struggle with the Sanskrit pronunciation. And I don't think it's that hard. I think no one's ever bothered to teach them, right? So it's like enya from Spanish. So señor, you just have to learn how to form your mouth in the right shape, and then the sound will come out naturally, okay? So shanti, okay? So if you feel like you've got a good handle on that, shanti, shanti, let's practice a little bit. Shanti, 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 shanti. Now we'll do it a couple of times more quickly. Shanti, 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 shanti. Okay? Now what we're going to do is the Shanti mantra. So we're going to take a deep breath and I'll demonstrate, okay? So, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Okay? That's the mantra. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. All right? Really simple. Okay? So now we're going to do it together. So what I want y'all to do is sit up straight. Okay? Take a deep breath in. And Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. And again. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. We're going to do it a third time. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. And now what we're going to do, we're going to add 2 modifications, okay? The first is we're going to slow it down and stretch it out a little bit. The second is that as you chant with your eyes closed, focus on the vibration, not on the sound. So at the very beginning, we're going to be focusing on the mouth to make sure you can do the movements right, make sure you get the pronunciation right, invoke it properly. I saw a good comment that pronunciation is something, invocation is sacred. It's interesting, right? So it's an invocation. So we're going to focus on that vibration and kind of slow it down a little bit. Don't try to squeeze through it, okay? Or don't try to rush it. So close your eyes. Just take a moment to observe your breathing. And now we'll take a deep breath in and begin. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. And really feel that, you can continue to breathe, feel that rising force as you say Shanti. right? So focus on that upward momentum that you'll feel kind of from your abdomen through your chest and out your mouth. So we'll begin again. Deep breath in. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Again, deep breath in. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Take a moment to breathe. And one more time. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. And so this is a practice that you want to do if you're feeling upset in some way. It's an invocation for peace. And even from sort of like a mind-body perspective, whatever feelings you have, negative emotions tend to be felt in the belly, in the chest, and in the throat. And so as you chant Shanti mantra, you're like letting that stuff out. You're like cleaning it out, cleaning it out, cleaning it out. You can do the practice for 5 minutes at a stretch if you want to. Ideally, you can work your way up to 15 or 20. And we'll sort of demonstrate now what a really like kind of slow Shanti mantra looks like. In general, the Shanti mantra is going to have a lot of physiologic benefits that all meditations have. You'll notice that as you do the Shanti mantra, it's by definition going to change your pattern of breathing. So remember that the rate of exhalation heavily governs the calmness or speed of mind. So when we're very, very rapid, hyperventilation is associated with anxiety. So as we slow things down, it may not be anything mystical about Shanti. It just may simply be breathing. Right? So we know that some of these things are going to work regardless of whether there's any emphasis to the mantra itself. For those of you that are open to it, I recommend opening yourself up to the Shanti mantra and seeing what kinds of effects it has. Remember that a lot of these mantras were kind of developed based on these weird like experiences or spiritual sensations, this idea of prana or chi. Right? So does it affect that in any way? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Your choice whether you want to explore that or not. So we'll end one more time. So I'll end with one final Shanti mantra that'll go nice and slow, okay? So you can join me if you want to. So we're going to breathe, just in and out. I'm going to do 3 breaths, and then the big breath, and then the mantra. So breath number 1. Number 2. I'm going to slow down before number 3. Number 3. Nice and slow. And now we'll begin the Shanti mantra. A deep breath in. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. That feels good. Right, so as you do that nice slow breath, notice how you feel. Maybe a little lightheaded. Maybe it was a bit much for you. That's okay. Do what your breath allows. Shanti means peace. Right? And feel that vibration. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Great question. Why can't we just go peace? So, beautiful experiment. I want you to try chanting peace 3 times. See how you feel. See where the vibration is. See what the difference between Shanti and peace is. You'll be able to tell. So here's the last thing I'll leave you with. You know how we were saying earlier that science or the world or reality operates by logic, and human conception tries to capture it with our own logic. That there's like the way the world works, and then there's our understanding of science. And through progression, we get closer and closer to the way the world works, to understanding the real science. So the Shanti mantra was not someone trying to invoke the idea of peace. It was someone trying to understand the fundamental nature of peace and then figuring out what set of syllables closely matches the quality of peace. The Shanti mantra is not words that mean peace. It is an attempt to encapsulate the fundamental concept of peace with a vibration. And I know that sounds very esoteric, very mystical, and very weird. But if you all want to understand this, you can do it too. So for example, the breath has a particular set of syllables, consonants, vowels that are the sound of the breath. There is a sound of the ocean, right? These things have sounds. And so what mantras are, they're reverse engineered from observation. They're not language that is then used to capture a concept. I guess actually that's exactly what it is in a sense. But what I mean is that the mantra is reverse engineered from the thing itself. And so that's why it's Shanti. And that's why when I teach, I don't teach peace, peace, peace. And if you chant peace 3 times, you're going to feel the difference. And then you ask yourself, which one is closer to peace? And then you'll find an answer. And then your logical mind is going to be like, what the hell does that even mean? How can a sound be close to peace? Like what? Those 2 things are fundamentally not related. But then you do the practice, and then you'll be like, actually, yeah, like one of these feels more peaceful than the other. And so as the yogis observed and observed and observed, they came to these conclusions. They're like, that's weird. Certain sounds are closer to peace, and certain sounds are closer to like other stuff, right? And they just followed their observations. This is why they were, in a sense, scientific, because they didn't approach it with a preconceived notion. They just saw what they made observations, and then they practiced experiments, and they came to conclusions. So for those of you that are skeptical, don't believe me. Do it yourself. If you come to a different conclusion, then you come to a different conclusion. Maybe I'm wrong. Definitely a possibility. Quite likely. Maybe my experience is different from yours. Also a really, really important thing to understand. Maybe there isn't one Shanti mantra for all people. All possibilities. But how are you going to know? Practice it, right? Don't take my word for it. Practice it yourself and see what conclusions you come to. Am I confident in my conclusions? Sure. Are they 100% correct? How on earth can I say that? I have no idea. Maybe you'll be the one who discovers that the peace mantra is superior to the Shanti mantra. Who said that the yogis did it right? Who said that the yogis got all the way there? Just practice. You figure it out. You decide. What do you say to these people that say that these mantras are demonic? I'd say that these mantras aren't demonic, but they're absolutely demonic mantras. And we just don't teach those. And once you learn a demonic mantra, you'll understand what a demonic mantra is and how these are really not demonic mantras. Right? So let's remember that in these traditions of meditation, there's black tantra, white tantra, and red tantra. Interesting, right? Because in Final Fantasy, there's black mage, white mage, and red mage. May have something to do. A lot of the Final Fantasy world is actually based on the Hindu mythology or Buddhist mythology. So 3 kinds of tantra. Mantra is a subset of tantra. So there are black mantras. And there are also like negative organisms, right? So a lot of the prayer and stuff, which we tend to steer clear of. Right? So if you look at like Hindu temples, they're like gods there, right? And in Buddhist temples, they're bodhisattvas. These are like organisms or beings that have like a positive alignment to them. They come from the positive material plane or the positive elemental plane or whatever. But in these mythologies, there are also villains, rakshasas, asurs, right? These are the things that, once again, in the Final Fantasy games, like, are the bad guys. So that level exists too. We just don't go near it. Right? But like, who said that all the bodhisattvas have to be good? That's a duality and a judgment in and of itself. It's there. If you guys really want to know, you can go to some of these, like, you know, weird places and really do some cult kind of stuff. And then you'll encounter this stuff. It's wild, dude. Don't get me wrong. It's just not, you know, not everything is for Twitch. What happens after demonic mantra depends on the mantra and how long you chant it. Right? So anyway, who are we rating, by the way? Stream's done for today. We're wrapping. Yeah, we can raid Poke. Is Poke streaming? Let me just double check, make sure Poke is streaming. Yeah, let's raid Poke. All right, send Poke some love. We'll see you guys summon Heraktis on stream. I think we may have had one or two on already. Maybe there's one every time we stream. Did you ever consider that? We'll see y'all on Friday. Take care, everybody.